and we've also got an office in Singapore. We work mainly in Asia with a bit of activity in Australia. And during our lockdown in New Zealand, which you may have heard has been perhaps not quite as bad as others, we've been based here in New Zealand, and so obviously not traveling into Asia. But what I want to do today is share my thoughts on how we can use technology to better manage what's happening in our cities. I'm pleased to say that there are a number of cities that have been doing this. You may well be aware of some of them. For others of you, hopefully this will be a checklist of some of the things to do. I've been working in the space for about 10 years, as I said, and in that time, I suppose what we've sought to do both is help guide cities on their smart technology journey, but also deliver particular tools and practices that cities can use. And so we'll talk about some of that in the half hour or so that I have with you today. So as you all know, we've been in the middle of pandemonium for at least 6 months or so this year. And of course, conventionally, the word pandemonium we know as being tumult, chaos, things are uncontrolled. It's typically associated with people, usually behaving in a wild way. But my case to you today is that COVID has redefined pandemonium. And so if you look around many of our cities, if not today, then certainly it's where they've been. We now have pandemonium in terms of a dearth of activity. We have a pandemonium in terms of things not happening. And so what that should be, though, is a call to act, as all of these big events must be. And so what that's done, of course, is introduce new city challenges. And of course, for those of us who work in cities, or indeed the most of us who live in cities, it's not as if our existing cities didn't have challenges: transport, housing, climate change, the economy, plenty of existing urban challenges, but now we have new ones. And in some cases, some of these challenges are going to be with us for a while to come. And so, as is the nature of the human condition, oftentimes out of challenges comes a response. And the response for COVID is for us to provide more of a rescue for technology. And happily, we've got a bit of a head start on that already. So with that context, what helps cities then manage a pandemic? And the starting point, I suppose, is where we've been for the last 10 or so years. And that's this space that's sometimes called City 4.0, the so-called smart city. Now, by no means do we have smart cities all around the world, and many of you will know that. Although certainly countries like Dubai and the UAE and other parts of Asia have been leaders in terms of some of the smart technology. I was at the World Expo Congress in Barcelona last year, and I know Dubai always makes a very strong claim to the success that it's done there. But many cities may not be as advanced as Singapore or Dubai, but many have picked up these 8 elements and are using these now as part of the template for responding to COVID. You can see the 8 general elements here on the screen: the green city elements, governance, public safety, smart buildings, energy and utilities, transport, education, and healthcare. And I'll be referring to those as we progress. That's been where we've been. But what's happening, of course, is that the smart is getting smarter. And that was happening already pre-COVID, of course, just because technology was developing. You can see perhaps in the graph that it's not just the core city functions that are benefiting here, it's other elements. I mean, the Internet of Things, of course, has a much more pervasive impact than just the traditional city functions of transport, waste, and energy. What we're seeing the smarts progressing into, of course, is education, health. These aren't always controlled by cities per se. In that case, maybe it's the job of the regional government, the state, or sometimes even the federal government. But smart is getting smarter, and what COVID, I'll talk shortly, has been doing is giving that a bit of a leg up. So let's look in a little bit more detail about some of these smart city tools. Now, some of them are quite straightforward. Some of them are almost pedestrian. They've been around for a wee while. In Vienna, they use this app, the Vienna mobile app, as a city planning tool. It's possible to plan and book and pay for journeys across Vienna. This is an early version of what's called mobility as a service, which is a way of integrating all the different ways you can travel across the city into one place, not just plan for it, but also pay for it. So we haven't been able to transport, of course, around our cities for most of COVID, but that tool, I think, gives us the opportunity to kind of make much better leverage of transport within our cities. Another tool is something that Singapore has been using to better manage home energy. This allows people to manage their air conditioning or servicing units remotely when they're at work. Another one is, it's got lots of different names around the world, but the city of Vancouver in Canada uses it to encourage citizens to report problems that they see in the street. It could be refuse or waste that's been dumped, perhaps by accident or maybe deliberately. This, of course, has also been something that some cities have used actually to indicate people who aren't complying with COVID rules. This was never designed to actually photograph people because of the privacy issues involved. It was designed by cities to kind of, I suppose, better connect problems with city administration, that is to say waste, traffic problems, that sort of thing. But this sort of device has been used, as I say, to take photos of people who aren't wearing masks. That's created some challenges from a privacy point of view, but that's a good example of an existing technology that's being challenged with COVID. There's clearly a benefit in making city authorities aware of people not complying with COVID rules. We just need to sometimes change the rules regime to make that legal. Of course, at the heart of all the devices and the apps is what's happening with data. And you'll all be very aware of this, that technology has first and foremost made us more able to collect data and then analyze it in a much more meaningful way. At the heart of this, for most citizens, of course, is the role that a device has. Here, of course, I'm talking really principally about the citizen interface with cities rather than business. There is, of course, an equivalent device for manufacturing and for businesses. But at the heart of a lot of the changes that are happening with COVID and citizens is the ability to leverage our phones. And that's why, of course, many of us now have our COVID tracking app or a version of that we're using perhaps to scan or in the case of Bluetooth, be recorded by city administration to track COVID contact tracing. All this comes together, the technology and the data, into the Internet of Things revolution, which has been underway for a few years now. And this graph, I think, shows just in the last few years where the biggest push has been. Because many of our cities, particularly in Asia, but of course other parts of the world, are confounded by traffic problems, we've seen huge increases in the ability to connect devices, sometimes devices that people have, increasingly devices in cars, to provide information to traffic planners so we can better manage traffic. That's also been a big play, of course, in utilities and with lighting. And this is also introducing a whole range of different tools. I mean, drones in the middle there are being used in a bunch of cities now, or being trialed. On the right, we see in many cities now in the developed world, particularly kiosks, which can be used to charge phones, sure to get public information, but actually much more useful So an integrated maybe ATM, mobile phone charging unit, as well as city information on public events. And then, of course, we have devices that are connected to us personally, that may themselves actually be connected into a broader healthcare system, as well as, I've mentioned, things like COVID tracing apps. So today's COVID city really is becoming an array of sensors, an array of mechanisms and tools that we can use. And what's happened, of course, with COVID is that some of these sensors have been more vital in terms of some of the decision making that cities have had to do. And that was an unintended consequence of some of this investment, because many of you will know that there's been some discussion in recent years about the cost effectiveness of some of the smart city investments that have been made. Some of the actually rate of return rates haven't quite been what they should be. So what we've been able to do with COVID is leverage some of that investment in a way that wasn't previously expected. So given the applications that are underway and some of the leveraging that's happened, what does the COVID future hold for us? Well, as we all know, there's been an AI summer and a artificial intelligence summer dawning for a wee while now. And this sun that's slowly dawning, of course, has started moving much more quickly in recent years. In scarcely 5 years, as this graph shows, we've been able to kind of get the error rates for determining whether something was a muffin or a puppy down from around 30% to 5%. So quite a big change. And that growth in the 2010s has certainly improved to a level that we're seeing much more utilization of AI in manufacturing, of course, but also in city activities, call centers, contact centers. It performs a key role. There's certainly, as we know, quite a room to go, though, to get to that safety level that we need, for example, for kind of human conditions. A 5% error rate is still not quite good enough for us to be safely taking our hands off the steering wheel for driving. But that, of course, is the direction of travel that we're seeing. The thing that will help AI the most, and this is also a leveraging impact that I'm seeing happening in some cities from COVID, is 5G, because, of course, constraints on how much utilization we can get from the systems is something that 5G, if we can get the investment right, will enable. And a consequence, of course, of this AI summer are these sorts of metrics. So I mentioned this to you because these are sort of investment environments that cities have been grappling with. And what COVID has done is it's put a different lens over some of these. And some of these investments might have been further down the track, frankly, simply because of rate of return. And what we've been able to see in terms of the need to have much greater reliability about tracking some of the COVID metrics, some of these investments have been able to be brought forward. So a consequence of the 10 years of work, I suppose, getting sensors in place around cities, the big changes we've seen with technology and applications, means that we've got this trinity developing in this AI summer. With IoT, Internet of Things, we're on the cusp of something big. With AI, as it moves towards advanced AI, we're on the cusp of something big. And with 5G, as rollout progresses, you'll know there are many 5G trials underway now. The trinity of these three things is something that COVID now has the potential to kind of really catalyze. And then in terms of the utilization of AI, of course, there was a recent study done by Stanford that looked at the range of particular use cases that AI and advanced AI specifically would be of most beneficial for city. Key ones, of course, transportation, autonomous cars, freight vehicles, aerial deliveries, altering, of course, how we work, live, and play. These all need to be to have a COVID filter over them now. Service robots, service tools. Some of you will have seen these in hotels and other service places now. Specialized robots providing security, providing perhaps cleaning, those sorts of things. Entertainment, of course, the whole way the retail experience will change. And then in terms of public safety and security, cameras, drones, the ability of software to analyze crime in a much more discreet and sophisticated way. So these are some of the tangible elements that are around the corner. But it doesn't stop there. Another development that particularly the likes of Singapore, Taipei in Taiwan, and Seoul in South Korea have been progressing, other places too, is this idea of urban neural networks. And this is really thinking of our cities like they are, in fact, human entities, and particularly thinking of our city networks like the brain. And so trying to look at things, what those things should be connected to, and then what services should be delivered from them. So this urban neural networks is a specific application system that's been developed to kind of use the data to connect it more to actually people's movements. So we can be moving around a street in a city. We can give permission for data to be exchanged from our movement patterns, perhaps what we're, the places we're going to eat and drink, and all that can be centralized and connected into the city to actually then deliver better services. And so urban neural networks are specifically underway in a couple of different cities, usually in trial and not very expensive just at this point. But we have got cities deploying meshed topology, long distance wireless platforms, which just offer much higher data rates and better security. Another aspect of this is digital twinning, which I'm sure most of you will have heard about. This has been underway for a wee while now. There are a couple of great examples, particularly the ETH laboratory, cities laboratory at NUS in Singapore, who replicate really some of the big city changes that Singapore is doing. So they create them in the virtual world so they can be tested and examined. Cycle lanes, for example, in many cities, putting cycle lanes in can be very problematic because of the disruption that it causes by taking parks away or the impact on businesses. These things can be digitally developed and tested with the actual users. So you can get the the car drivers or the businesses come in to kind of check and see how they are. It goes further though too. Some of you may have heard of DeepManta, which is a new category of artificial intelligence which targets visual object recognition in cities. So it's capable of performing advanced and efficient real-time analysis of video stream information by, for example, identifying and counting vehicles on the roads in time, or the number of people wearing masks. The building blocks keep on going. Blockchain, of course, is another key element, and this is quite separate to the idea of cryptocurrency. There's a technical relationship between the two, but they're very different. Blockchain is a ledger, an online ledger that allows for much quicker transacting. And PricewaterhouseCoopers did a seminal study more than a year ago now, looking at the different elements that they thought, excuse me, could be enabled or more value could be gained from. And if you look at the elements on the screen here, look at the dimensions that are covered where blockchain could have a value-adding role. This certainly looks like a new way to run a city, if you think about all these elements here. Blockchain isn't just a theory though, it's in practice. Certainly those who are in the UAE will know of examples in Dubai. And in this particular example I've got here is from Taipei, where they use IoT sensors and a blockchain basis for their refuse. And so the refuse system and the particular sort of transaction management of that is based on blockchain. So this is another technology tool which, look, it's probably been seen to be a little bit leading edge and not something that's been part of mainstream for cities. But the COVID effect is now having cities look at whether there's an opportunity to develop this more quickly. And so we see, in fact, in the case of Taiwan, they have one of the more developed ecosystems of blockchain, which, as you can see, cover quite an array of different city activities: media, venues, financial services, infrastructure, intellectual property. So whereas Taiwan was looked as one of the outliers in this space, what the COVID effect is doing is forcing people to think whether there's opportunities to add value more quickly. So you've heard me talk about this COVID effect, and that's what it's being called now in sort of the smart city lexicon, as being the opportunity to hardwire in some of these smart city technology benefits more quickly. And we've got some specific cities examples here to finish off. Vancouver, as a number of cities do, had an online dashboard which was available for citizens to check on things like crime severity, emergency response, that sort of thing. So what they did was update this with key metrics that were relevant to COVID. So cities maybe that had lockdown, that what they could do is feed data in so people could kind of get a sense about sort of what the COVID impact was in their city. In Singapore, a remotely controlled multi-terrain robot dog called Spot, who you can see here, was deployed in one of Singapore's largest parks. And it uses cameras and locally developed video analytics to estimate the number of park visitors, safety sensors to avoid collisions, and it has a sound system for broadcast messages. So this reduces the manpower required for park patrols, obviously, avoids physical contact between staff and visitors. And so that has a key benefit in a COVID world. And another pilot development Spot was used also to deliver parcels, to deliver items such as medicines to patients in a COVID quarantine isolation facility. And I think my last example is in Japan, who have taken another big step forward towards building their technology-enabled super cities, as they call them. And so they've used COVID as the rationale to pass new legislation that will help advance local plans and lower regulatory hurdles. Japan's been one of the countries in Asia that have been progressing smart city activities. But of course, these things normally take ages because they have to wend their way through different state or city bureaucracies. And so what Japan has done is use COVID to say, look, we've got to make more progress more quickly. And so they've introduced a top-down legislation to break down some of those regulatory barriers so some of the technology effects can be delivered more quickly. So the broader COVID effect that's happening in these cities, of course, is an integration of activities. Many cities still are too silo-based. That's a legacy function of how cities developed. What we're seeing the COVID technology effect as is with seeing smart city platforms providing a solution for managing data from a variety of sources into a single environment. And so you're seeing an integration element driving together those component parts of cities to forcing city managers and city data scientists to work more closely. ABI Research summarized some of these use cases recently. That's ABI Research, and some of the key things that they were seeing that were being progressed and advanced were the use of drones for communication and enforcement of social distancing, also the delivery of medical supplies, as I mentioned, via the robot. New types of surveillance, AI-based remote temperature sensing, autonomous freight, autonomous last mile deliveries, digital twinning, as I've mentioned, and real-time dashboards and data sharing, including the use of smartphone data crowdsourcing for location tracking. So where will all this lead us? I mean, the short answer is we don't know, because as we know, we're still living with this. And I think not a week goes by where we don't learn something new about this crisis we've had to cope with. But the signs are, in fact, that we'll be getting a lot more value more early. And that's good news for those of us who've been in this space for a while, because a few years ago, McKinsey's did this very broad study of what they specifically thought the value would be. This was partly to address that comment I made early in the presentation about, concerns about rate of return for smart city investment. If you Google, smart city rate of returns, you don't get much information. And so McKinsey's did this meta study to look at a few different cities at quite a granular level about, well, what benefits actually to citizens and to cities do we get? And so there were a range of metrics that you can see here that were quite specifically measured. This is a very valuable study, but it still struggled to kind of get through the city investment decision makers. You see this on this slide that showed the potential for smarter, safer, healthier cities and other measures. We can be wealthier and happier too. So a lot of benefits at the data level. And what the COVID effect, I think, has the potential to do is to fast track us potentially towards this Halcyon Cities 5.0, this idea of using technologies to actually, at a broad city level, to deliver not just a safer and more secure environment, but also one where COVID will be better managed too. Thank you for your time. That's some of my contact information. If you want to get hold of me, LinkedIn's probably the best channel. I think that's one that we all work on. Very happy to take any reflections, any comments, questions, or feedback.
Thank you, Mark. It was a great presentation and it was a pleasure listening to you. If there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to ask, or you can type in the chat window as well.
I think it's always challenging, isn't it, after that big information download? Perhaps I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, I just allowed unmuting to participants. So if someone has any question, they can unmute themselves.
Yeah, that's right. It may be easier to for someone just to say, make any comments. Everyone will have their own experiences of this too. And for some, as I said at the start, their city won't be.
I have one quick question. How is smart city domain progressing in New Zealand market, like on the government level? What are the key initiatives, and how pandemic has changed smart city initiative? What impact it has brought on smart city?
It's interesting. New Zealand being such a small country, you would think it would have made a bit more progress in this space, and we can launch rockets into space in New Zealand, but in this area, in our big cities, particularly Christchurch, which was the one that suffered the very bad earthquakes, they've done they've done a complete city rebuild. So they've certainly done some great new work. Our largest city, Auckland, where I'm based, we've still got some work to do there. Look, it always comes down to leadership, I suppose, and priorities, doesn't it? I think we've certainly seen in our capital, Wellington, and in Christchurch, they're able to make good progress. Australia, where we do work, I think, and they've got a lot of smaller cities. Everyone knows Sydney's big, but Sydney may have 5.5 million people, but they've got 35 mayors, right? And what they're able to do, in fact, is make more progress, I think, using some of the challenges that I've talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience, please? Okay, so thanks a lot, Mark. It was a great presentation, and thanks for your precious time, and it was nice hearing you.
You too. Thanks so much. Have a great second day.
You too. Bye-bye.